Early. Awesome. We're going to be starting in just a moment. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to wait one more minute just to make sure everyone's settled. Please remember to mute yourself. All right, it's 3:32. With that, I'm going to start. Welcome everybody to the 2021 Better Buildings Healthcare Sector Meetup. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm going to jump straight into it. So I'm going to start going with a few housekeeping items that I would like to highlight for everyone. Please note that this session is being recorded and that we're going to follow up when today's recordings and slides are available. Attendees, you each have the option to share your video as well as unmute yourself. That being said, we ask you to stay muted, right, to avoid any unnecessary background noise. If you experience any audio or visual issues at any time throughout today's call, please message our support team using the chat function located on the bottom of your Zoom panel. We will be using Slido for polling and interaction. So I'm going to explain that further on, but if you joined the Better Buildings Summit, you might probably be an expert at Slido by now. Can we go to the next slide? Next slide. Awesome. So a few of you probably know me already. My name is Mariana Ejea Casalduc. I am an ORISE Science, Technology, and Policy Fellow with the Commercial Buildings Integration Team that is within the Building Technologies Office of the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office in the Department of Energy. I am the healthcare sector lead. I started this last August and took on the healthcare sector then. I am also the hospitality sector lead and have been leading this sector since this last January. I work on a wide variety of different issues. I'm focusing on HVAC and healthy, efficient investments in schools. I work with BTO's data management suite of tools, and I also coordinate and host the Better Buildings COVID-19 and pandemic preparedness focused webinar series. With me, I have Andrea Dukakis and Ali Georgeson that support me on this sector, and they're going to be introducing themselves.
Cool, thanks, Mariana. Hi, everyone. I think I know most everyone on the call. If you don't, my name is Andrea Dukakis, and I'm the account manager for healthcare, as well as commercial real estate and market rate multifamily. And I'm also part of the team that runs the waste pilot. So happy to be here and to hear, to talk to everyone today. And Ali, why don't you go ahead?
Thanks. I'm Ali. I'm the junior account manager for healthcare as well as commercial real estate. I'm also on our workforce development team, and I run webinars for the Better Building series, and it's great to have everybody here.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys. Let's go to the next slide to talk about Slido. Oh, first the agenda, definitely. So I'm going to be, obviously already gave the welcome. So I'm going to go into some program updates and let you all know what's new in Better Buildings. Then Paul Torsellini from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory is going to be talking to us about cold climate heat pumps. Then we have Kim Trenbath from NREL as well, talking about plug and process loads. And then we're going to have Nikita Radhakrishnan, from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, who's going to be talking about recent diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in the Department of Energy. And then we're going to have an open discussion and Q&A. Next slide. Awesome. So I'm sure some of you are already familiar with Slido. So please go to www.slido.com. You can also download the app. It's really easy and quick to set up using your mobile device. And then if not, just open a separate window in your internet browser and access Slido. The event code for today is #health. If you have any issues accessing the polling or the Q&A, please chat Andrea and Allie through the chat. We're going to be using Slido for all of the questions, and we're going to be running a few polls in just a moment. So if we can go to the next slide and get started on those polls. Okay, awesome. Yay, healthcare. Okay, our first poll. Is your organization pursuing carbon goals and or incorporating low carbon strategies? I'm going to stay a little bit longer on this poll than usual because I just noticed that I kind of went through the Slido introduction really quickly, and I want to make sure everyone is able to access it and interact with us. All right, answers are coming through. Wonderful. It's great to see that a lot of folks are answering yes. I'm going to keep that up there for just a few more seconds. All right, let's move on to the next poll. What carbon accounting tools or frameworks is your organization using? As DOE moves forward with centering carbon in a lot of its programs, this information is really important to us. So if you're using any carbon accounting tools, please let us know. Okay. Credit 30. Energy caps, I heard about. A lot of folks answered energy caps during the Better Building Summit. That's very interesting. NREL is researching carbon accounting methods, Energy Star, and Practice Green Health Survey. Wonderful. Healthcare Without Harm, GHG Toolkit. All right. With that, I think we can move on to the next poll. What is the focus of your organization's internal or external diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts? So we have workforce development, long-term strategic planning, organizational mission, workplace safety, that includes DEI training and HR resources. There's community engagement and outreach, stakeholder engagement. There's also, the philanthropic focus. Oh, wow, so there's a little bit of everything. Top 3 are long-term strategic planning, workplace safety. Oh, that's number 1 now. All right. Can move on. Wonderful. What healthcare-focused publications do you read or refer to? ASHI's weekly emails. If there's any magazine or any online forum that you are particularly interested in, or that you've utilized to showcase your projects and your work, we'd love to know that. Obviously, Better Buildings, always sharing the great successes of our partners. Becker's, Practice Green Health. All right, we're a little bit short on time, so I'm going to move on. Thank you all so much for interacting with us. Oh, we have one more question. What healthcare green building focused conferences do you normally attend and find valuable? Yes, another question we'd really be interested in knowing. Clean Med. Green Build. A lot of Clean Med, that one's really popular. The ASHRAE conferences. All right. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for interacting with us through Slido. We're going to go into our program updates now. Next slide. First, we'd like to welcome our new partners. So we have the Physicians Realty Trust, a healthcare real estate investment trust that joined the Better Buildings Challenge in March with 4.5 million square feet committed and a 2030 goal year. They have also joined the low carbon pilot, which, not pretty difficult to do once you've just joined Better Buildings. So definitely commend them and welcome to the Physicians Realty Trust, also known as DOC. That's how they're listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Alina Health, based in Minnesota, joined the Better Buildings Alliance in March and brings with them a portfolio of nearly 10 million square feet. We also have Parkland Health, based in Dallas, that joined the Better Buildings Alliance in September and brings nearly 2.5 million square feet to the Better Buildings program. Welcome to all of our new partners. Next slide. Awesome. Two of our Better Buildings goal achievers, Cleveland Clinic and UW Health, have set new goals with the challenge. Cleveland Clinic, a goal achiever last year, recently set a new goal to reduce their energy use intensity, their EUI, 40% by 2030. And UW Health, a goal achiever in 2018, set a goal to reduce their EUI an additional 10% from their 24% achievement by 2027. So congratulations to all of our Better Buildings partners that are striving forward and setting new goals. Next slide. Wonderful. We also want to congratulate UNMC for achieving their water goal this year. They achieved a 23% savings over their nearly 7 million square foot portfolio. Some water saving in projects included the replacement of non-recirculating cooling systems, repairing faucet aerators, and installing low flow fixtures and plumbing, replacing water fountains with water bottle refill stations, and improving cooling cooling tower efficiency. So big shout out to Jed Thompson, who is our contact at UNMC, and congratulations on the achievement. Great, next slide. Oh, we're gonna play a video now to showcase UNMC's work. Awesome. Let's go to the next slide. Wonderful. Before we dive into this, I want to quickly point out that there is still one more poll up on Slido about the priority areas that DOE should be focusing on in fiscal year 2022. So if you still have Slido up, we'd love to see those answers. Just had to wrap up really quickly since we're a bit short on time. As we mentioned during our last steering committee meeting, we have recognized that there is some overlap between our healthcare and higher education partners in terms of facilities management, of course, especially within better buildings. And because we've noticed that there is interest in exploring this overlap, we will be hosting a peer exchange this summer to bring these two sectors together to discuss shared energy related challenges at a medical and academic campus setting. So stay tuned for more information and keep an eye out for this on your Better Buildings newsletter. Awesome. Next slide. There's a lot of new material on the Better Buildings Solution Center. These slides will be sent out later. So if you're curious about any of the solutions that I'm going to mention, you're going to be able to click through them and easily access them. The University of Nebraska Medical Center's Moorer Center for Public Health has found 45% energy savings from a recent solar installation that they've met. So you're able to access that resource and check that out. Montefiore Medical Center, a waste pilot participant, used waste audits, employee engagement, and resource reduction methods to see an 11% reduction in hazardous waste. That solution is also available, and many others. So please feel free to explore these. And if you have any questions about how to find anything on the Solution Center, or if you're looking for a topic that none of these solutions cover, please let us know and we'll be able to get the best resources to you right away. Awesome. Next slide. Of course, we have our summer webinar series starting in June. Partners will be able to discuss some of the most pressing topics they're facing, share best practices and innovative new approaches to sustainability and energy performance projects. If you are interested in registering, you can do so at the Better Building Solutions Center and click on events and webinars. But as you all know, my inbox, Andrea's and Allie's is always open. So please let us know if you need help finding any of these resources, or if you're looking for a specific webinar on a specific topic, we're happy to help you. Great. So let's go. I'm ready to introduce our panelists. First, we're going to have Paul Torsellini. Paul is the principal engineer for the Commercial Buildings Research Group and has been with NREL since 1994. Paul has authored or co-authored more than 50 papers and articles related to energy efficiency and zero energy commercial buildings. Paul has been key in the development of the Advanced Energy Design Guide series from ASHRAE and has chaired 2 of the guides for K-12 schools and grocery stores. And like I mentioned earlier, Paul is going to be talking about cold climate heat pumps. We have Kim Tren-Bath with us today as well. Dr. Kim Tren-Bath is the Acting Innovation Lead for Systems Technology Research and Development in the Buildings and Thermal Sciences Center at NREL. She oversees projects related to plug and process load efficiency, commercial building heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, automatic fault detection and diagnostics, and advanced technologies that will make buildings more grid interactive. She leads the U.S. Department of Energy's Better Buildings Alliance plug and process load technical team as well. We also have Nikita Radhakrishnan. Nikita is a technical advisor for the Building Technologies Office at the U.S. Department of Energy and a research engineer at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. She's currently on loan from PNNL to BTO, where she's leading the development of a roadmap of emerging building sensors and control technology, and assists in developing the R&D vision and strategy to achieve BTO and DOE's mission. She's also the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Lead at the Building Technologies Office, BTO, and helps with improving the diversity of BTO's research partner base. So Paul, if you're ready, we can go to the next slide and you can take it away. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Let's go to the next slide and jump into some of this. I'm going to preface some of this discussion in that there's a lot of interest around heat pumps and that a lot of this is changing pretty quickly. And so feel free, to send me, updates and thoughts and experiences that you've had with heat pumps, especially in these colder climates, and ideas that you have, so we can kind of continue to flush out even the thinking on this presentation. So I thought I'd preface this just with a little bit of an overview, and I used an example of hot water heating, which is on the right-hand side of this, that if we need a unit of hot water for something, and comparing that with gas, looking at the efficiency of that, maybe 1.6 units of natural gas go into that hot water heater. And if I've got to pull that out of the ground somewhere, and there are some losses associated with that. So it's about 1.74 units of gas to make that 1 unit of hot water at the end of the day. If I think about this as having gas power plants making electricity out on the grid, at the site, that electricity conversion is pretty efficient to get that 1 unit of hot water, but there's a lot of inefficiencies in that power plant generation. And so it actually takes a little bit more natural gas than just, consuming that natural gas on site, but they're pretty close. Where there's a huge benefit is taking that advantage of kind of moving that heat instead of producing that heat with that hot water. So if I take 1 unit of hot water out and look again at how much kind of natural gas had to go into that power plant or extracted out of the ground to make the electricity for that heat pump, it's significantly less than either of the other two options. What's interesting is, go to the next slide. And if you want to talk about electrification, it's like, well, what do we do with gas hot water on site? However, with the other two options, we could certainly think about deploying, solar or wind or some other renewable source in order to make that electricity for those electric units. But that doesn't necessarily mean that electric resistance becomes a perfect solution, because back to the heat pump, I could actually install 1/3 the size of the PV or 1/3 the size of the wind to make that work. And so that's kind of what drives some of this discussion around why heat pumps. So next slide. The reality of heat pumps, though, is that they're moving heat, right? So you're extracting heat from a cold outside environment. We're going to talk just about heat pumps and using them for heating. The reverse is kind of air conditioning systems. But you're moving that heat from a cold outside ambient. And so it's really dependent on what that temperature is. And it's also dependent on the temperature that you're moving it to. So if you need to make hot water that's really hot, that's going to be a lot harder than making hot water that's kind of tepid, or making air that's like just above body temperature that you might use for conditioning a space. So it really depends on when it gets colder, what happens, right? So it is harder to do that. And there's some different modes of thinking about that. As it gets colder outside, there's a couple of different things that can happen. One is that the amount of heat that heat pump can produce goes down because it's harder to move it. Or perhaps the heat pump works a little harder, so the power increases, or at some point it just gives up and stops. And that's an important part to think about, because at really cold temperatures, gas probably could continue to operate, and even electric resistance will continue to operate, but it may just not keep your building quite as comfortable. In this case, it's a little bit harder pill to swallow if it just stops. And the other part is that often some of this equipment will switch to electric resistance because of that decreased heating capacity. And then you've got a sharp power increase, right? And so then you've got to have the electrical infrastructure, you end up with demand charges. And those are things that you need to think about. The other thing with heat pumps is because you are extracting the heat from the outside air, those coils get cold. And a lot of times, especially in the more humid climates, they have to defrost. And in order to defrost, you basically somehow put a little heat into those coils in order to melt that off. Well, at that point in time, it can't put the heat into the building. And so you have to not only consider what the heating capacity is at those temperatures, but how much of the time will it be defrosting, which further reduces that heating capacity. Okay, so those are kind of a pretty strong list of problems. Going to the next slide. And so one of the ways, and I'm sure a lot of you tuned in, is like, oh, Paul will have all these answers. I don't have all the answers on this, but I do see a trend of a lot of interest in this. And so some of the thinking is, how do we think about moving towards electrification, right? Especially in the colder climates, right? And as you touch buildings and design buildings, can you think about making the building heat pump ready? And I kind of stole this term from when we talked about solar being really expensive, but we made buildings solar ready, right? Is the roof ready to accommodate those solar panels? Do you have conduit in place? Do you have electrical infrastructure in place? Start thinking about the future of heat pumps in the same way, because it is an area of a lot of research. There are some pieces of equipment out there today, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But at least think about, do you have the electrical service size, right? Do you have conduit in place that if you wanted to start making some switches, you could? Think about, on the actual emitter or at the end use, right? Lowering that needed supply temperature. I recently worked with a school that got rid of their steam system, which was 70, 80 years old. It was on the brink of failure. It was very expensive to maintain. And they wanted to switch to hydronic hot water. Well, instead of designing it for 160, 170 degrees, it was designed around 120 to 130 degrees, still using a fossil fuel to use that, but actually setting it up so that a heat pump could be inserted for most of the operation time, because the heat pump could produce those kinds of water temperatures. But it hasn't been done yet. So the first move was moving away from those temperatures. Also think about energy storage in this. When we talk about, especially like service or domestic hot water, those tend to be very, they can be very predictable loads, but there can be a lot of variation in those loads. And one way to deal with that variation is with some kind of energy storage. And having that heat pump system, designing it to run more time, but allow that storage to really deal with those peak demands, right? That's one of the reasons, and even on that image of hot water heaters, we typically have a tank, even with electric resistance, right? And that's a balance between how big is the tank versus how big is the wire. And being able to think about and put those pieces together. And then also consider, hybrid systems, right? Especially if you have existing equipment. I kind of mentioned this with this little school project. And think about kind of an 80-20 rule, right? That 80% of the time, the heat pumps will do just fine in the operation, but for a little reassurance, leave an existing boiler in that can meet some of that load at the end of the day. Next slide. So what I've done is I've kind of segregated these into some different topic areas and said, okay, if you've got a rooftop unit and here's where you are currently, what might be an electrified solution to that? And if you're not quite ready for that, what things can you do to kind of plan for that? As I started the discussion, these temperatures and sizes are things that I have found, things that I've seen installed. The availability of some of these is limited. So like in this case, rooftop units up to 10 tons seem to be fairly readily available. After 10 tons for heat pumps, you'll find them in a lot of, cut sheets, but they may have some more limited availability. You do have to ask, and you do have to do some homework around some of this. Some of them have, they're called dual fuel, where they have a heat or a gas furnace that's built into them. And so, which may operate when that design temperature is below that heat pump. There's other strategies to say, if you do need gas, you increase, loop temperatures when you do it, right? And again, these are kind of a dual fuel heat pump. You may need bigger units to meet the heating loads. We're kind of accustomed to a cooling load, and especially as you move further north, you say, well, what is the delta T between inside and outside? And it might be 25, 30 degrees, even on the hottest day, and you could add another 30% to deal with humidity loads to that. Well, think about what happens on the heating side, where you're challenging that same piece of equipment, those same heat exchangers, those same compressors. Instead of being a 25 to 30 degree delta T, you might need a 70 to 75 degree delta T on a design day. And that just actually makes all of the equipment larger, in order to meet that heat pump load, especially if you're striving to do it all with heat pump. It's pretty easy to think about heat pumps if you know that the temperatures won't drop below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, that does not work, in most of the cold climates, and as advertised, we wanted to talk about cold climates here. But certainly if you have facilities that are in other climates, really think about, can I use a heat pump? Especially if you're trying to pilot the technology, learn about the technology, get more familiar with it. Start with a climate zone where you have good confidence that it's going to be effective. Again, back to the delta T, ground source will typically minimize that difference between the cold sink and the hot, or the cold source and the hot sink that you're trying to put heat into. And so ground source is also an option in many of these systems to help get them up and running. There are challenges with that, especially if you're very site constrained. And so a lot of considerations in that one bullet there. All of these start saying is that you can always, through design and planning, start thinking about what your electrical sizing is. Perhaps assume that the COP is about 1.75 on these coldest design temperatures, and start thinking about how to put these in. If you're rethinking roofs or designing roofs, think about what that curb capacity needs to be in the future, knowing that a lot of this system is going to increase in size. Now, one of the benefits about increasing the heat exchanger size is often you can get higher efficiencies already on the cooling side, just because there's more heat exchanger availability there. But allow for that flexibility, right? So that down the road, you don't have to say, oh, I can't do that because we didn't design the roof properly to accommodate that kind of weight. Next slide. Oops, I think we went the wrong way. Thank you. There's other types of HVAC, a lot of gas heating, especially with either direct fired and air conditioning loops. This might look like a large scale residential unit. A lot of equipment availability in this, definitely also equipment availability, and you can even put them together pretty easily by installing a gas furnace with a traditional air handler on top, or air conditioner on top of it with the air handler. Many of these are good to minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, give yourself some assurance, pilot it, convince yourself that it will work. The same thing goes with the mini splits or variable refrigerant flows. I have a mini split at my house, and I've run it down to 15 below without any problem. You know, there are some cautions around controls. There's cautions around field installed refrigerant lines, you know, that you've got to move that energy between an inside unit and an outside unit somehow. You know, make sure that the quality is really there so you don't end up with leakage of refrigeration. And again, the ground source minimizes that impact from inside to outside. Another advantage on a ground source is a lot of that equipment is contained in a single package, much like the rooftop unit, and therefore you don't have to worry about the field installed refrigerant. And there are definitely, you know, things that are in smaller scale. You know, there is a lot of residential equipment available for these smaller applications, and it's definitely a good place to start. Next slide. So a lot of organizations use hydronic systems in one way. I already mentioned kind of the idea of, you know, just reducing those loop temperatures with that. It might be chillers, it might be gas and oil, you know, with gas and oil burners. All chillers can work in some way as heat recovery. The real question comes is, what temperature has that chiller been designed to provide heat at? And can you use that heat at the end of the day, right? And again, the cooler that you make those loop temperatures and be able to meet those loads, the easier it is to use some of this equipment. There's some other strategies out there in terms of also kind of water to water systems. A lot of energy tied up in sewer heat recovery. You know, you paid money to heat up that water. There are definitely systems out there for sewer heat, taking that heat and then dumping that into the heat of the building. There are several buildings now out there that have used this exclusively for heating their buildings. They also combine nicely with, say, some of the heat recovery chillers, where you might use the chiller as the preheat and then the sewer heat recovery to kind of finish off the water to a higher temperature. Building exhaust is another great supply of heat. And basically putting heat exchangers for your heat pump within your supply and discharge air systems. Again, it really reduces the delta T of that system. There are some chillers that are specifically called heat pumps. They tend to have a better balance between the amount of heat they can put out and the amount of cooling. You do have to, in all these systems, think about the defrost cycles. So say you've got a system that might need, you know, 2-ish or a little bit more than 2 heat pumps, install a third one so then they can rotate through and they're not all defrosting at the same time. These tend to be available up to about 70 tons each. You know, I'm sure somebody may have one a little bit larger. If you know of one, send it to me so we can, you know, update this information. You know, and the heat recovery chillers are really available in all sizes, right? Depends how much recovery and at what temperature. And again, hot and cold water tanks help with the size and capacity, help with that loop volume, help stabilize these systems. You can actually design some of them. I have a little heat pump hot water heater, which sits outside at my house. And we actually have it programmed because it's on a big tank. It only runs during the day. And the advantage of that is that it actually has the benefit of using warmer temperatures than kind of the coldest temperatures at night, and it relies on the tank to drive it. And again, ground source kind of sits here. Same kinds of planning requirements, right? Electrical, plan for storage tanks, plan for where you might put these storage tanks as part of a campus planning project or a building planning project. Next slide. And then kind of tying to that is domestic or service hot water heater. You know, this is a very interesting, this is the only place you're gonna hear me say electric resistance, but sometimes if you have like bathrooms that are remote and a lot of circulation loops, right? Think about eliminating the recirculation loop and just having point of use electric. There was a building that we looked at where the circulating pump used more energy than just providing electric resistance at all the end uses. for kitchens and bathrooms. And so, you can lose a lot of energy with the recirculation loop, plus the pumping energy. There's definitely heat pumps coming along, again, especially in the smaller sizes. There are companies out there that are ganging their smaller systems together to make larger systems, especially for kind of residential kinds of applications and smaller buildings. You really do have to follow the manufacturer's recommendations very carefully in how they're set up. It is not, you can't just replace it from a gas boiler. And again, I have one, I've run mine down to 15 below. I've seen ratings on these down to -23 or so as being operational. And for planning that, right, minimize the loads, really think about how to distribute your hot water, whether you're distributing the hot water or distributing tanks and systems around buildings, and design the space for that. So I think that was the last one. Go to the next slide. I did put some references on here, just some sources that have a lot of data on what is available. Both of these are kind of databases, and you can plug in information and get results back out of it. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Paul. And all of you are going to get copies of this slide deck, and you'll be able to access all of those resources. Kim, if you're ready, please feel free to take it away.
Excellent. Thanks, Mariana. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay, excellent. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. I'm Dr. Kim Trenbath, and I'm the lead for Systems Technology Research and Development at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory based in Golden, Colorado. I'm really happy to be able to talk to you today about plug and process loads in healthcare. Next. So you probably know what plug loads are and process loads, but I'm going to go over it because this is what we're going to be talking about today. Plug loads are any plug-in or hardwired electric or gas loads in your building that don't fit into any of the other building end use categories, such as refrigeration, HVAC, and lighting. And so here's some examples of some of the plug loads. Some of these are commercial and some of these are residential, but they're the plug-in electronic equipment. Sometimes we use the word miscellaneous electric loads, and those include these loads, but not the gas loads. Next. And plug and process loads is PPL, so I'll use the term PPL, and that includes process loads as well. So some examples of process loads, processes in your building, especially in the healthcare setting, include your vertical transportation like elevators and escalators, commercial equipment, and commercial laundry if you have that. And then coming online, kind of already here, is the electric vehicle charging. There's a lot of research that's being done for the load profiles for EV charging, definitely at NREL, and this could be considered a process load as well. Next. So there's definitely a challenge with controlling plug and process loads in your healthcare building. And the reason for this is that plug and process loads right now make up 47% of the whole building energy use of commercial buildings in the United States. And I'm pretty sure that the percentage is high for the healthcare sector as well. And these loads are made up of many tiny small loads plug in and various process loads. They're actually very diverse. So it's not a one size fits all strategy to control them. And so there's lots of challenges associated with controlling the loads, as well as the fact that this is a growing percentage of your building energy use. As other end uses get more and more efficient and more of these electronic devices come online, the plug and process load percentage is going to increase. Next. So how do we address this challenge? Well, we can first start with some of the work that we've done from 10 years ago. And Paul Torsellini, who just talked, Dr. Torsellini just alluded to this. And he talked about he didn't allude to this, but he is part of the team that developed the Advanced Energy Design Guides. And this is the 50% one written for hospitals in 2012. And even though this is written 10 years ago, some of the strategies in here are still very relevant. And what do I mean by that is that there are still places where you can improve on procuring your energy, your equipment. So procuring energy efficient equipment, appliances, computers, and even AV technology. Also, making sure that any sleep settings are on your equipment. They don't come out of the box like that all the time. Sometimes the sleep settings are disabled out of the box. So you just want to make sure that those are enabled when you put them in your building. And then also in the AEDG, there's kitchen equipment strategies. Next. So one thing that's good news for the healthcare sector is that you can use strategies that other building sectors have used to control your plug and process loads. Why? Because the healthcare sector includes many different space types that we usually develop strategies for, such as office, hospitality, food service and K-12 schools, and higher education. For example, healthcare, you guys have offices in your facilities, you have conference rooms. There are some of the control strategies that we're suggesting for office can be applied for your building. Hospitality, same way, strategies for controlling the rooms can be applied to the patient rooms as well as laundry. And so you can see that there's some similarities with kitchen equipment and laboratory equipment for these other building types. Next. So let's get into some of the resources that we have that you can use to develop strategies for controlling your plug and process loads in your facility. So one resource that we have is a guide for assessing and reducing plug and process loads. These guides were written for office, and we also have one for the retail sector, but again, it's very applicable for your office spaces in your facilities. So here's some strategies. First of all, designate a champion. You want to have one person in charge of making sure that plug and process load strategies get implemented in your building. You also want to institutionalize your plug and process loads reduction practices. This means, like, once you determine what your strategy is, get it into your policies and also get buy-in from your leadership. You also want to establish the business case because often that's required for buy-in from leadership. And I will tell you that I see that a lot of the hospitals and healthcare facilities on this call have implemented strategies such as PV and battery storage. Well, I think a really good way of capturing additional efficiencies, saving more money, is to try to control the amount of energy load that is used by your plug and process loads. So bring that into your business case and get your management buy-in. And then finally, when you're implementing, you want to make sure that your employees and your visitors are educated on the benefits. So this could be not only educating your staff through announcements, like you would announce something regularly, but then also educating your visitors. So this is really important. You want to have signage that explains what's going on with the plug loads, because they might not be used to those control strategies. Next. So let's see, in 2016, NREL published a research paper, Healthcare Energy End Use Monitoring. And here's two graphs from this paper. And I think you all are very aware that some of your process loads for your medical equipment are pretty high energy consumers. So in these graphs, there are two MRI machines, and this is the load profile over 24 hours. You can see on Wednesday, there's a base load of about 7 kilowatts for an MRI machine, and then it's in use some of the other time. But look over at Sunday. One of the MRI machines is not really used the entire day. So how can we reduce the energy use of that MRI machine? Well, potentially, there is a problem to be solved, potentially by the manufacturer. Can the manufacturers produce one of these machines that can be shut down or lower power and ramp up and be calibrated appropriately when it's time to be used? Next slide. So another strategy is to categorize your PPLs for resiliency. So we're well aware that it's possible that we could go into an outage, and that's probably why you have battery storage on your building. But when we go into the outage, we want to make sure that we prioritize the life-saving equipment, these essential loads, and you don't prioritize those non-essential loads like your vending machine, your microwave, or TVs. You want to make sure that you have your life-saving equipment on. So what I'm saying here is that these non-essential loads are good candidates for controls, ways to shut off these loads when you don't need them. Next. So how do you do that? And so there's a variety of plug load control technologies out there on the market right now. They include smart outlets that meter and control the outlets, so they can shut off power using the control strategy that's built into the system. There's also automatic receptacle controls. They can shut off power based on occupancy sensors or timers. Advanced power strips, same thing, shut off based on occupancy sensors or timers. And then emerging on the market are these integrated controls. So this is controlling your plug loads with a different building end use. So we have lighting controls, and if you can connect your plug load system with your lighting, say you're in a conference room, you don't need the lighting when nobody's in there, and you don't need the plug loads when nobody's in there, you can turn off the entire room. And that's what I mean by integrated controls. And those are emerging on the market now. Integrated controls also include connection to the building automation system. And so there's some field demonstrations in process now for integrated controls. Next. So I have a few more slides, and I want to cover some of the resources that we have that you can go to our website and learn more about that. So this one is our smart outlet fact sheet. So if you don't know what smart outlets are and you'd like to learn more, I will say that they would be good options for plugging into some of your office area equipment. You can go to this green link here and access the smart outlet fact sheet. Next. Then we also have information on advanced power strips. Next. We have a webinar on automatic receptacle controls, and you can link to it from our on-demand webinars. So you can watch them at any time and learn more about what these controls are and how to implement them in your building. Next. Not only do we have this automatic receptacle control webinar, we have many webinars. All of these are accessible on demand through our website. Next. And the most recent webinar that we presented was, 2 days ago. And we hosted the Houston Advanced Research Center. It is an office building in Houston, and it is a zero energy building. And so they talked about how they got to zero energy by controlling their plug loads among some of the other loads. So you can check that out on demand. Next. And not only do we have those helpful resources, we have other things. We also have utility incentives, and these are incentives offered by utilities for implementing energy efficient plug and process load controls, or maybe things like controlling your vending machine energy use. So these are all available on the website. Next. And that's all that I have. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions later. Mariana, you're muted.
Thank you so much, Kim, for that super informative presentation. All of the resources that Kim mentioned and alluded to, you'll be able to access those later once we share the slides with you all. Next up is Nikita. So Nikita, if you're ready, feel free to start.
Thanks, Mariana. So hello, everyone. I'm Nikita Radhakrishnan. I'm with the Pacific Northwest National Lab, but currently I am on detail on loan with the Building Technologies Office at the Department of Energy. I'm a research engineer. I work with building energy management systems for both residential and commercial buildings. And today I'm here as in my capacity as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Lead, or DEI Lead for BTO. And I'll tell you in a little bit what that means and what my current responsibilities are. Today I plan to describe to you what BTO is doing around DEI. So let me first start with why DEI. Next slide, please. So at our umbrella organization, EERE, Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, and at BTO, we have aggressive energy efficiency goals that you can see here. We have 125 million buildings in this country, and the challenges are enormous. We've heard a little bit about it today. It's hard to achieve as it is, but we can't do it unless we are inclusive of the views, backgrounds, and expertise of every diverse set of players. And this diversity is in every dimension: race, gender, educational background, personal experiences, and others. So we have a ton of work to do, and we need all hands on deck. Next slide, please. So at BTO, a couple of years ago, we started with asking new questions. We asked questions like, who's not at the table here? For every research or deployment project and every event that BTO hosts. What is the gender breakdown of our participants? Who are we partnering with year after year, and who else could we partner with? And where should we be present so that others know we exist and want to collaborate? So we first took action internally in BTO. The first thing that we did was start a DEI working group. This was a group of a few people at the office who were particularly interested in spending some time on these issues. So that group began a monthly DEI lunch discussion. It was open to anyone in the office and even a few folks from other DOE offices. We've read books together, articles, we've had external folks come and talk to us. Just a time once a month to have conversations around DEI topics. We also added DEI questions to our internal employment survey called BEVS. And this gave us a sense of where we are in these areas and how we can improve. And we plan to do that every year, every time the survey goes out, so we get a sense of how are we improving in these areas over time for our own staff. And then we also spent a lot of time working on a DEI strategic plan. And I'll get into a few more select activities that are part of this plan. I saw that a lot of people have similar strategic plans in the poll that was initially shown. So next slide, please. Okay, so first we saw the need for a DEI lead, someone who is required to carry out the rest of the activities in the strategic plan. And that's where I come in. I'm the DEI lead this year, and I'm required to spend a fixed amount of hours on my day job for DEI activities for the office. We're looking at our hiring processes a little more closely. We're expanding outreach. This is through alumni networks and any other services that DOE is able to leverage. Another requirement we have is the incorporation of DEI considerations in individual staff work plans. So our program managers are helping individual staff members consider DEI when they are setting their goals and milestones for their programs for the year. We're also participating in what we call the Meetup internship. That stands for Minority Educational Institution Student Partnership Program. By being part of this program, we're able to host minority students for a 10-week summer internship. And of course, we'll be tracking everything we're doing. We'll be taking our strategic plan and reassessing at the end of each year and setting new goals for ourselves for the next year. And the last one I want to mention is we are targeting increased work with minority serving institutions, or MSIs, through a bunch of different avenues, which I'll describe next. Next slide, please. Okay. So we're looking at a few select programs in the office that to address the STEM pipeline and to inspire the next generation of building and energy efficiency professionals. So first up is a partnership initiative with MSRDC, that's MSI STEM Research and Development Consortium. This is a consortium of over 70 MSIs, and it's growing very rapidly. And so the idea behind this is students and faculty of MSIs have historically been underrepresented in having access to research contracts with government agencies. So this partnership basically sets up an agreement between DOE and the Department of Army, allowing greater access for BTO and other offices to MSIs. So it provides what it does is provide a unique funding vehicle that allows these institutions to directly negotiate research awards with us. So this way we get to form new working relationship with the faculty at these institutions, and it gives us a way to invite more MSI faculty to our BTO events, peer reviews, and other events. And this brings diverse voices to the table, and that's what we need. We started this at BTO, we're expanding it to other offices within DOE. And of course, this work is being done by a AAAS fellow at our office, Terrence Mosley. Next. Okay, we have the Jump Into STEM competition. It's led by our Tech to Market manager, Mary Hubbard. This is a building science competition for undergrad and graduate students that have ambitious diversity goals. So the diversity objective is inclusive of an interdisciplinary mix of majors and representation by students from backgrounds that are underrepresented in STEM. And winners of the competition get internships at select national labs and even mentorship opportunities with both BTO and the lab. And this competition is being led by NREL and the Oak Ridge National Lab. In fact, Kim is our NREL lead for Jump Into STEM. Next. Mary also set up the Innovation in Buildings Graduate Research Fellowship, or IBuild. Through this, a few select fellows will receive research and educational support to conduct innovative research at their home institutions in an area that is related to building energy efficiency. So the fellowship also provides professional development, mentoring, networking, and internship opportunities. Next. Terrence and Mary teamed up to set up the GEM Fellowship Partnership. So GEM stands for Graduate Education for Minority Students. Through this program, we recruit high quality, underrepresented students to pursue master's and doctoral degrees in STEM. And then they get paid summer internships with BTO. So it's a win-win. And the last one I'll mention here is Solar Decathlon by Holly Carr. Next, please. This is an international collegiate competition for preparing the next generation of building professionals. They do a great job of actively recruiting diverse participants and reaching out to MSIs. And some of their affiliates are National Organization of Minority Architects, American Indian Higher Education Consortium, and the Society of Asian Scientists and Engineers. And I know Paul is part of the Solar Decathlon team. Next slide. Okay, so when I talk about my DI work, I'm often asked where one could get started or how I got started. So I started including that in my presentations. So pursuing an engineering degree and a doctoral degree has had a huge personal benefit to me in my life, and I feel like I should pay it forward. So when I came to the US in 2016, I looked for volunteering opportunities, and I started with teaching at the Family Learning Center in Kennewick, Washington. It's a center that educates the refugee population in the area, both kids and adults. And I started teaching math to high school students because these students are not at par with their peers because they've not got continuous education through their childhood. And I loved doing that. I could see that I was making a difference in their education. So I looked for other opportunities and signed up for a program called Skype a Scientist. It's an international program where scientists sign up and then teachers from all over the world look at their profiles and invite them to talk to their students. And this is all ages. So that's those are the two pictures that are being shown here next. And then I looked at my employer, BNNL, and they were ramping up their STEM education outreach efforts in the area. And they have a program called STEM Ambassadors. And what that program does is train researchers and scientists to be able to talk about their own work to the public without technical jargon, which is very difficult. And this is for both children and adults. Frankly, adults is more difficult. And then they enable you to go out to any community events with some tabletop displays related to your work, and just talk to everyone about their work and try to pique interest. So I signed up for that, got trained, and these are a few photos that from a library event, from a high school event, and from an event at the park. I talk about electrical engineering. That's what I have my degree in. I talk about buildings. I sometimes even talk about cybersecurity. And I have a lot of fun with these kids, and I get great questions. Sometimes I have to Google the answers too. And that's me and Terrence at the Maryland STEM Festival doing pretty much the same thing for buildings. So if you're interested in helping the STEM pipeline and help make the next generation of building science professionals, just go out to these events with a friend or colleague and talk to the kids about your career. It might seem small to you, but setting aside like an hour a month for this can have a huge impact over the years for your community, and it can generate ideas for yourself and your company to adopt at a broader scale. So I'll wrap it up, and I'll say BTO is going full steam ahead with its ambitious DEI plans. And the hope is, as the diversity of BTO and its stakeholders improve, we get a better understanding of technology challenges and market barriers. And that leads to better innovation and creativity for building energy efficiency, for better products, better homes, better buildings across all market demographics. And that's critical for a clean energy future. And that's our goal. And I'll end with that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nikita, so much. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to Paul, Kim, or Nikita, or myself, Allie and Andrea as well, if you have questions about any of the topics that we covered today, or you need additional information on any of the resources mentioned. But if we can go to the next slide, I am happy to start that Q&A process here, so we can maybe get a few of those questions out of the way. Paul, Kim, and Nikita, if you want to turn your cameras on, we can try to tackle some of the questions that we have in Slido. So I'm going to start with the first one that reads, are there any heat pump focused research or deployment initiatives Better Buildings healthcare partners can join? So Paul, I think that one's for you.
I think so. I would say at the moment, stay tuned.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know, there are definitely some initiatives coming down the road related specifically to heat pumps, and that goes from the research to the field testing. You know, one way that you can get involved in that discussion today is with the low carbon pilot that DOE has through Better Buildings. So where we're asking organizations to pick a couple of buildings and then kind of create an action plan, you know, kind of like I talked about, what is your pathway to get there? And you may say that part of that action plan is to identify a heat pump that can work in certain conditions. That may then start you know, a lot of interest around that we might start working on things like advanced specifications for some of those things, right? So stay tuned. Many of that is on the radar screen, but I guess my real message is be ready, because it is coming.
Wonderful. Thanks, Paul. Kim, I think the next question is for you, and it reads, what's the best way to get manufacturers on board to design MRI machines with sleep mode built in? We haven't found any that have that option.
Great question. Thank you. I think I'm going to answer with two strategies that I think are a good start. And of course, requiring a sleep mode for an MRI machine is much more complicated than it is for a coffee maker. So it is a challenging, it's probably a challenging research question, and technology needs to be developed. So one thing that we can do is we can start putting this requirement into the procurement specifications when you're procuring your equipment. So when you go out to the market and you solicit an RFP for your MRI machines or your CAT scans, you can require this. or maybe say it's a nice to have. And it kind of puts the manufacturers on notice that, hey, this is something that is showing up in my RFPs, and this is something that we need to respond to. The other thing that we could do is we could start working groups. And so that I would love to facilitate that along with my colleagues at the Pacific Northwest National Lab. We can facilitate a working group if this is something that DOE wants, to start thinking about strategies for improving energy efficiency in the hospital equipment. And then it could be a DOE sponsored working group at first, but then it can move into another industry group so that more manufacturers get noticed.
Excellent. Thanks, Kim. And then Nikita, we have a question about the BEVS survey system. The question is simple, ask whether or not it's a free survey platform that people can offer, but I'm personally interested in knowing about the anonymity and the protection of personal information when reporting on DEI to higher ups. If you want to expand on that more generally.
Okay, so BEVS stands for BTO Employee Viewpoint Survey. So it's an internal, it's just what we call our internal survey. It's not a platform. So it is a completely anonymous survey, and that was important to us. And it's behind our DOE firewall too. So we did take care of making sure that information cannot be retained on who is putting in the responses to the survey. So completely anonymous, and we've gotten great participation and responses. So people look forward to it every year. Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Nikita. Super important to make sure that that stream of communication throughout an entire organization is open, that we're constantly learning from each other. At this point, it looks like we don't have any other questions on the Slido Q&A, but if others do come in a bit later, the poll and the Q&A will be open a bit longer. We'll make sure to reach out to you guys and connect you with those that are still curious about a few of the items discussed here today. But with that, I'm happy to say that we can wrap up a few minutes early and give people some time back from their day. Awesome. Great. Thank you all so